Hey young adults, I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation today with one of our staff members. We shot this before COVID started, so obviously things are a little bit different now, but I think there's still some really great stuff that you can pull out of this, some key takeaways that you can learn from. So I hope that you really enjoy today's conversation. Thanks. Hey young adults, Pastor Josh here, and I'm here with my friend Nathan, and he is our Bowmanville Site pastor. And we're just gonna have a conversation today, talk a little bit about the Bowmanville Site, about what being a site pastor is like, and then we're also gonna kind of go into some conversation around Christian education and apologetics and just learning. Why don't you start us off a little bit, Nate, by telling us about the Bowmanville Site and what it's like?
Yeah, so hey guys, it's good to be here. Thanks, Josh, for doing this. Being the site pastor in Bowmanville, it means that I'm basically responsible for everything that happens in Bowmanville and making sure that kind of everything runs smoothly. But not just that, it's kind of my responsibility to make sure that Bowmanville, Sanctus Church Bowmanville, is moving forward in the mission and the vision and the values that we here have as Sanctus Church. And really kind of making sure that we as a kind of smaller part of the larger church are moving forward in that vision together and staying in alignment with that. So, yeah.
That's great. And tell us a little bit more, maybe some of our young adults maybe didn't grow up in a multi-site church, or maybe this is their first time being a part of a multi-site church. How does it work, like with a site pastor and then kind of like our multiple sites that we have? What's that relationship like? What's your role like in that?
Yeah, so I would say I'm primarily responsible for the people. That's kind of a lot of my focus really comes down to the people in Bowmanville. We've got amazing staff here at Central who will provide a bunch of resources and like the kids ministry materials. I'm hands off for a lot of that stuff, which is great because it gives me the opportunity to really invest in the people and where they're at in Bowmanville. So, which is really important for Bowmanville.
Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, tell us a little bit about, some of our young adults go to Bowmanville, but lots of them don't. So what's kind of Bowmanville like as just like an area, as a community, as the site? What's it like?
So Bowmanville is families, like young families. It's awesome. I mean, we have the highest percentage of kids to adult ratio by far. So that's great. It comes with a lot of challenges. I'm going through child dedications right now, and we've got to actually have more than regular because we've got so many kids and babies. But I love that. When you think of Bowmanville, think of families, think of young families. And so that's great. Bowmanville also has an interesting dynamic where it's kind of got this rural feel to it in some of the people who grew up in Bowmanville, and now it's being kind of overflooded with GTA. So it's got that clash between kind of rural worldview and mentality, and then people who can't afford houses in Toronto coming to Bowmanville to buy houses. And so you've got more of that urban mentality, and you've got this wonderful kind of hybrid between the two. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, what would you say? I'm sure we're going to have lots of our young adults kind of move out to that area, to Bowmanville or even beyond in the future, just because of house prices and whatever, to raise kids, to raise families, to buy places. What would be a great way for them if they were maybe moving that direction? Maybe say they grew up in like Pickering and they're moving eastward one day. What would be a great way for them to get connected with the Bowmanville site? Should they just show up on a Sunday, or what would you say?
Yeah, definitely show up on a Sunday. Don't show up during the week because that's a school and you might get kicked off the property. But come on a Sunday morning. That would probably be the best way for you to get a feel of what Bowmanville is like. I mean, we do have an office in downtown Bowmanville. I'm there most Tuesdays and Wednesdays. That's a great place as well. You can come by and say hi. But coming on a Sunday morning and then getting connected to the community, joining some of our connect groups that happen in Bowmanville and Newcastle and Clarington area, even Curtis. That'd probably be the best way.
Yeah, that's so great.
And we do have a lot of young adults in Bowmanville, which is awesome.
We do, yeah. Like we've got multiple young adult groups that are going to be out in that area, so that'll be exciting.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about, I know that before you were a site pastor here, and I think actually while you were kind of getting into that role, you were finishing up your master's. So tell us a little bit about what you studied and kind of what your heart was behind wanting to do your master's.
Yeah, for sure. So I went back to school in 2018. Started my master's, finished it in, 2017, finished it in 2018, graduated in 2019. It's just kind of hammered through that process. It was always my dream to get my master's because I believe education is really important. as a pastor, as a leader in a community, and a person with authority, and especially when you're preaching, hundreds of people come and listen to you for half an hour, 40 minutes. I believe that they should be some of the most educated people in our society. You have a position of authority, and I think it makes sense to have some idea about what you're talking about. So it was very important for me to get my master's, and then I wanted to explore kind of a graduate level research, understanding. And so I focused a lot on systematic theology and homiletics, which is the practice of kind of preaching and communication. Those were two areas of passion of mine.
And could you maybe just explain what's systematic theology to our young adults? Yeah,
for sure. Systematic theology is basically, theology is our understanding and our study of God. Systematic is kind of breaking that down into a systematized kind of process and how we understand that. So it's a wonderful way of like clearly outlining what beliefs in God look like and what accurate belief, how do we get accurate beliefs in who God is,
right?
Not just our own imagination. So.
Yeah, and so you were saying there, it's important that, especially as a pastor, if you're a teaching pastor, to have education. But what do you think about, like, say, your average, just young adult, your average Christian? What does it look like for your average Christian to be a thinker or a learner or someone who reads? Like, what do you think is an appropriate amount? How much would you recommend? How should they get into it? Why should they maybe be a learner as a Christian?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think that I think that you hit the key. I think it's just don't stop being a learner. I'm not a natural academic. Oh, I covered my mic, sorry. I'm not a natural academic. And so I actually have to really work at it. But I've always believed in the value of education, the value of learning. And because that's been a value of mine, it's something that I've continued to learn and to grow in. And I had, when I was a full-time student doing my master's, I was reading a lot. In this season of life, I'm reading a lot less just because I don't have the time for it. But the point is that you just continue to be a learner and you just continue to grow for the rest of our lives. I don't think that would ever stop. So
that's great. I know something that I've been interested in. I know other young adults have been interested in is this concept of apologetics, which is really study of how do you defend your faith and how do you have proofs for certain claims of Christianity. But some people have argued that maybe apologetics isn't as relevant anymore as kind of culture moves to be maybe less based on reason and thinking and a lot more influenced by our feelings and experiences and emotions. Do you think that there's still a place for apologetics? And if so, how should a young adult go about maybe learning or studying in that area?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm super passionate about apologetics. I think it is key for us as a church to not lose that component of our faith. I think faith and reason aren't opposites. They work together. They're two sides of the same coin. And so I think apologetics has a couple roles and functions. The first I would say is that the best apologetics are ones that are more about asking questions when engaging with people outside of the Christian faith. I believe that every worldview has these pillars, these foundations that they build on. Things like metaphysics, which is belief beyond reality. Things like ethics. Things like anthropology, or what does it mean to be human, and understanding of humanity as it relates to the world and animals, and theology. And there's these fundamental pillars, and I think that every worldview is constantly wrestling to find consistency amongst those pillars, amongst those foundations. So if I don't believe there's a God, well then why do I believe humans have intrinsic worth and moral value?
Right.
Why do I believe it's okay to eat a cow or an animal and not a human? And so those questions can create these tension. And I think that I personally believe every worldview that's not founded on Jesus has these contradictions. And I think if we as Christians can just learn to ask good questions so that people begin to realize, hey, I'm believing this and these two things don't make sense. I think that's like tilling the soil. I think that's like creating ground that then the Word of God or then the opportunities and the experiences then can kind of grow and blossom out of that. So I think that's the one side of it. And then I think the other side is that, experience is very important. And I think there's a lot of us who are experiencing the living God, and then all of a sudden we have a bunch of questions.
Right.
I mean, that was my journey. I experienced who Jesus was in a powerful way, knew I was in, knew that God existed. But I remember in my prayer to commit my life to Jesus, I actually said, I have a lot of questions still that I need answers for.
Yep.
and a lot of mine around faith. And so I then went on this journey of discovering answers for those questions, which was then a nurturing of what had happened in that experience. So I think those are kind of two areas that I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's great. I love what you're saying about asking questions. And, one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard when it came to, apologetics was someone was asking this person who's giving a lecture, like, how do I defend my faith? And this person said, well, why are you always defending your faith? Don't you also think that you should ask other people about their faith? And I think the conversation should be two-way. And I remember in university, some of my best conversations about my faith came out of asking people about their worldview. And then oftentimes, in a non, offensive way, just, helping people understand that their worldviews often aren't, perfectly cohesive either. And I think we're all wrestling through these questions, and I don't think any of us have it perfectly figured out. And it's by having that open, kind of just curious dialogue that we can learn more about how, in many ways, we're searching for similar things and we're trying to find the same answers. And we've maybe just from our upbringings landed different places. So
completely,
I love that. Tell me a little bit more about just your thoughts around maybe how a young adult could go about finding answers. Maybe they're wrestling with doubts, or maybe a friend's asked them some really great questions about Christianity, and they're like, oh, shoot, I don't know. I've got a lot of questions. How could they go find some of those answers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say ask Josh. He pretty much has the answer for everything.
Yeah, I'll give you a book. That's it. I'll give you a book and say
So I would say, if you're not a reader, consider becoming a reader, because there's a lot of really good books out there. I mean, Timothy Keller, Reason for God, like some of these classic and then more advanced apologetics, J.P. Moreland, William Lane Craig, Alvin Plantinga, like some of these legends who have been around for a while. But consider reading. If not, there's a lot of great resources online where you can learn and you can kind of explore in that area. There's a lot of really terrible resources online. But I would strongly consider, again, place it as a value to be a learner, and just make that a priority. And again, I'm not a natural reader. I read one book that I remember in high school, like one book. The rest of them I Coles noted and stuff, and I successfully got my master's. So I know that some of us say, you can't do, I'm not a natural reader and stuff. Just figure it out, work hard, and learn how to do that, because it's worth it. It really is worth it. So
yeah, that's so great. And I think even nowadays, like I have lots of friends who, they'll say that, like, I'm not a reader. But nowadays, like, you can get Audible and you can listen to books.
Totally, that's great.
Or even things like I love so many great podcasts are out there. Like one of the ones I listen to is N.T. Wright's. Got a great podcast where you can ask, people submit questions and ask him questions about the church and the history of the Bible and about evil and all these big questions of faith. And it's a great podcast to kind of just listen to on the drive to work or school. And way easier to digest sometimes than reading. So
for sure.
I love that. What's a book that for you has been super impactful that maybe really influenced your thinking or your way of life or any of that?
That's such a hard question. I was thinking, and I think that probably let's actually say a more recent book.
Sure.
I think that's a little more
in the past year or two.
What's really in a couple of years. I would say there's two books. I'll just give you one that I've actually been reading for a longer period of time now. It's Crucifixion by this scholar named Fleming Rutledge. And she's unbelievable. And it's a book that it took her nearly 20 years to write.
Wow.
Big difference between that and a blog.
Yeah.
And now it's a heavier duty one. It's over 600 pages. But I've been going through it for a long period of time. And she really kind of unpacks the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And what does this really mean? It's called the doctrine of atonement. This idea of what actually happened when Jesus died on the cross. And why did Jesus have to die? And why did he have to die this painful, grueling way that he did, and it's been really important for me because I think that that's a doctrine that the Western church is really struggling with, and I hear people talk about it a lot, and so this book has been really helpful in understanding what is like systematic theology, which we talked about earlier, which is actually true of what Scripture teaches. And then what is kind of the way even my church experience growing up actually blew this out of proportion, and it wasn't true. So that's been a great one. And I would say another one that I just picked up and was reading is On the Road with Augustine by James K.A. Smith, who's actually a Canadian philosopher.
Yeah, one of the best.
Ontario, yeah, he's unbelievable. Yeah. And it's a great book. I just finished reading this chapter, What Do I Want When I Want to Be Noticed? And it's all about ambition and Yeah, and I think you actually just taught recently on contentment. So it was a great paradigm reading that chapter and tiling into that. So
Right.
yeah, so that's another great book that I would recommend. So
That's so good. I love that. Hey, tell us a little bit just about if a young adult, if they're looking to maybe get started in maybe just like learning and developing that more education focused side, where would be a starting place that you'd recommend in terms of maybe a really great resource to kick things off, or even if you
Yeah.
know of if someone was interested in even taking classes at like a school like Tyndale, what would you recommend?
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of great books out there as starters. You know, I mentioned like The Reason for God, Timothy Keller. That's always a great book that targets young adults. There's more stuff like J.P. Moreland has one called The Kingdom Triangle. That's one about the soul, the spirit, and the mind all working together. So there's some of those books. If you are interested in learning and going to class, I mean, I did my undergrad at Tyndale in philosophy and religion. There's a couple philosophy professors there who are dynamite that I could definitely recommend, and some of the classes there and kind of growing and learning. But I think that there's so many resources, like, and you even reference podcasts and books and listening to that. Again, I think there's so many resources available for people to dial into online. So.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think, Nate and I would both agree. It's not really like what you start with, but just getting started, finding something that's, interesting to you and can help you grow and learn more about your faith. I have found that oftentimes through learning something about my faith, it actually has grown my experience of my faith too. I don't think that, experience and feeling and knowledge are disconnected, but I actually think in many ways they connect well, and you kind of need one to egg on the other. So
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, this has been like so great. I really appreciate you coming in and talk. If you're a young adult and you go to the Bowmanville site, I hope you know Pastor Nate. If not, definitely say hi to him on a Sunday. If you live in the Bowmanville area and maybe you haven't checked out the Bowmanville site before, definitely recommend that you do that and be a part of that community. It's growing. So many young adults are there. It's awesome. And yeah, we'll link if you're watching this on YouTube down below on just any resources that we talked about that you could listen to. So thanks again, Nate. And yeah,
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Hope some young adults visit you at Bowmanville.
Come say hi.
Awesome.